Okay, today we're going to discuss something maybe just a little bit different from usual. We're going to be discussing bumblebees. An animal that we often take for granted, but one that continues to completely shatter our understanding of biology and intelligence. And specifically because in just the last few years, researchers discovered that bumblebees are actually able to do some really incredible things that we're going to be discussing in this video. Several studies here uncovered that bumblebees seem to contain abilities that absolutely nobody expected. Abilities that can even be described as shocking. From solving very complex puzzles that even some really complex animals cannot solve, to even surviving underwater for a very, very long time. And so here bumblebees are now proving to us that a brain size, even if it's really small, size of a poppy seed, is actually capable of so much more than we ever imagined. And so basically here we're going to be sort of discrediting the myth of a simple insect. Because it looks like insects are not that simple after all. But here I guess let's start with the most famous misconception. The misconception in regards to flight. And that's because for many years there was this myth that bumblebees should not even be capable of flying, simply based on the laws of aerodynamics. Or basically their body was so strangely shaped and their wings were so tiny that quite a lot of biologists made an assumption that none of this should be possible. But today we know that this was just a kind of a back-of-the-envelope calculation that ignored a lot of things about actual aerodynamics and more specifically about how wings actually work. Because it turns out that wings can be super efficient if they're positioned in just the right way and have just the right shape, which is exactly what seems to have happened here. As a matter of fact, we know that bumblebees potentially had the same wings for millions and millions of years. Here's a really interesting representative of the bumblebee family from approximately 37 million years ago. But here, a much bigger misconception is in regards to seeing bumblebees as basically these biological robots, or essentially organisms driven entirely by instincts and possessing no complex intelligence whatsoever. But a lot of recent research from just the last year or so has effectively shown us that this was also somewhat incorrect. And specifically in regards to something that we usually consider uniquely human. Okay, let's talk about this a little bit more. So normally when it comes to observing others and learning from others, we always thought that this was something that only very complex animals, like in some cases birds, and of course primates, seem to be able to do. And so learning from others was always believed to be unique to extremely complex animals. Especially when it comes to things that we just cannot figure out on our own. And there's even a name for this concept. It's basically referred to as cumulative culture. The process where some kind of an animal, but normally humans, accumulate various types of practical knowledge over generations by observing each other and through collaboration. But turns out that these little guys are capable of this as well, which was of course the main discovery in this study. And so in the study published in Nature, researchers used a kind of a two-step puzzle box. A puzzle box that contained a sugar reward. And here insects had to push the blue tab out of the way before they could then push the red tab in order to reach the treat. And well, when they initially were introduced to this puzzle, none of them could solve it. It was just a little bit too complex and no bee could figure out how to move these tabs around in order to reach the reward. Mostly because the box was actually pretty complex and was very non-intuitive. But then they introduced a human teacher, basically someone who demonstrated how this can be done by moving the tabs in just the right order. And they of course had bees basically observe this. And well, first of all, right away, once observed, the bumblebees were able to easily do this themselves and reach the treat every single time. But much more importantly, when new members were introduced into this puzzle, the members that learned how to do this were then able to teach their partners how to do all of this step by step. In other words, a demonstrator bee could then teach the solution to other naive bees who had never seen this box. And this of course suggests a level of collective intelligence that was previously believed to be reserved for a lot of big brain mammals like primates, dolphins, and of course certain birds. And so back in 2024 this was actually kind of shocking. But it doesn't really stop at the puzzles. Additionally, bumblebees were observed to use tools and even count, and in this case seem to even have a concept of the number 0. And they can also perform basic mathematical equations and find solutions to math problems, at least when there is some kind of a sweet reward at the end. And more recently, in one of the studies from University of Oulu in Finland, researchers showed that bumblebees can even cooperate, where they were actually trained to move a block together in order to get a reward. And here the surprise was that in many cases, the bees would actually wait for their partner to arrive before even starting the task. In other words, they knew that they could not accomplish this alone, so they would not even attempt it until their partner arrived. And that of course indicates a lot of awareness, and especially awareness of others, and even their capabilities. And this level of coordination and cooperation is actually not really known in the insect world at all. And so in terms of intelligence and abilities, they're definitely super unusual compared to anything we know in the insect kingdom. But perhaps one of the most shocking discoveries from the last few months is in their ability to survive underwater. And well, in this case, this was once again discovered completely by accident and actually involved a bit of a screw-up on the researchers' part. And so here Canadian researchers were actually studying hibernation in various types of bumblebees. And specifically they wanted to learn more about hibernating queens. And so they kept these queens inside these refrigerator tubes, where they were mostly frozen. But apparently some of them melted, with the main researcher realizing that 4 of them had been submerged in water for what seemed to be several days. And so obviously in this case, the researcher assumed that the bumblebees would probably be dead. Since they were submerged for several days, it was assumed that they drowned. Yet surprisingly, they were not dead, and all of them survived just fine. They woke up perfectly fine and were able to do their usual bumblebee stuff. With the follow-up study then confirming that none of this was a fluke. Here by taking the queens of the common eastern bumblebee, Bombus impatiens, and placing them in the same hibernation state referred to as the diapause, so this deep winter hibernation state that many bees and bumblebees go through, they then fully submerged them in cold water for up to 8 days. And while to everyone's surprise, approximately 90% of them survived just fine, with the additional tracking involving oxygen and CO2 revealing that they actually seem to be breathing as well. And so obviously the question is, okay, so what's really going on here? And how are they able to do any of this? How can a terrestrial flying insect breathe underwater for over a week? And so here the secret lies in the combination of 3 factors: profound metabolic depression, anaerobic metabolism, and a clever way of extracting oxygen. Okay, so let's discuss all 3. First, when the bumblebee hibernates, the metabolism drops by approximately 95%. And when they're submerged in water, it seems to drop even more, down to about 1/6 of the normal hibernation rate. And so here the bumblebee is barely using any energy, which means that their need for oxygen becomes extremely low. Second, they possess anaerobic metabolism. So basically here this is a way for cells to generate energy without oxygen, which seems to be the case for a lot of bumblebees. And so here scientists found a buildup of lactate in the body of these bees. This is a byproduct of the anaerobic metabolism, which allows these animals to breathe without the use of oxygen. But the most surprising discovery was the fact that they also do breathe underwater, or basically they use respiration and are able to extract oxygen from the water itself. And here by measuring gas levels, researchers confirmed that bees were taking in oxygen from the water and then expelling carbon dioxide. And though the exact mechanism for this is not known yet, it is believed that they might possess some kind of a physical gill, kind of like a fish, where a very thin layer of air seems to be trapped against their body and allows certain types of gas exchange with the surrounding water, which essentially makes these creatures absolutely incredible because they seem to have abilities we never expected and actually don't even understand. But I guess one question here is, why would they even have this ability, and what could breathing underwater even do for them? Well, the answer seems to be evolutionary resilience. And that's because in most cases bumblebees hibernate underground in various burrows. And since they usually do this underground, there's always a chance for unpredictable flooding. This can be from heavy rain or, of course, melting snow. And if a queen could not survive this, it would actually wipe out the entire generation of bumblebees and even wipe out the queens. Actually, in this case, usually only the queens survive, just to restart every single spring. Yet, we know that bumblebees are very successful and seem to exist in almost all locations on the planet. As a matter of fact, the only reason they don't seem to exist in sub-Saharan Africa and Australia is because it might be just a little bit too hot for them. They generally prefer much colder climates. And that's probably why they developed this ability to breathe underwater, as springtime floods very likely affect them quite a lot. But understanding all of this is also important because, just like a lot of other bees, bumblebees currently are actually in a state of decline. They seem to face threats from habitat loss and pesticides that are known to affect their memory, brain function, and the ability to create a successful colony. Although based on these studies, now we know that they do seem to be just a little bit more resilient and may even have additional abilities we still have not discovered. But just the fact that these animals are so complex and so intelligent, and just the fact that they're not just biological robots or pollinators, already makes them so much more fascinating. Because here, a lot of these recent studies present bumblebees as very social, very intelligent animals that even seem to possess their own culture. But I guess importantly, all of these studies remind us that there's still so much we don't really know about the natural world, even in our own backyards. Which means that we'll come back and discuss some of this in some of the future videos once there are some additional studies. Until then, thank you for watching, subscribe, come back tomorrow to learn something else, support this channel on Patreon where you can find additional videos without any ads and can DM me directly, or by joining a channel membership that grants you early access. You can also support this channel by buying the Wonderful Person t-shirt in the description below. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye.